Well, we're going to talk about this topic. It's the secrets of successful communities. What this really is about, though, is about economic development in a rapidly changing world. We're going to talk about the role of community design and placemaking and so on in all of that. I like to tell people how I got interested in this issue, and it really goes back a long way. So during the Vietnam War, I was a young second lieutenant in the United States Army, and I had been to field artillery school and jungle warfare training, and I had orders to a small fire base in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. And literally 1 week before I'm supposed to fly to Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base in Saigon, I get a call from the Pentagon, and I have a colonel on the other end of the line, and he's with the personnel division, and he says to me, "Lieutenant McMahon, would you have any interest in being reassigned to Germany?" And I'm like, okay, let me think about that. The jungle or Germany? Yes, Germany sounds very exciting. I would love to go to Germany. And I was extraordinarily lucky. They sent me to Heidelberg, West Germany, which is the headquarters for the U.S. military in Europe, and also one of the most beautiful small cities on the planet Earth. And I was assigned as an aide to a United States general, and then I spent 2.5 years of my life flying all over Europe in a helicopter. And that experience completely and totally changed my life. But I didn't realize how much it would change my life till I flew home to Birmingham, Alabama, where I grew up, got out of the airplane and drove home, and for the first time ever, I saw the American landscape with a completely different set of eyes. Because, ladies and gentlemen, to travel is to learn. And that's what we try to do at the Urban Land Institute, and that's hopefully what we can do a little bit of here today. So let's just get started. I had a wonderful tour yesterday, and this is actually not the first time I've been here. My wife was a claims adjuster for State Farm for many years, and so she did her training here. And I'm sure all of you think of your hometown as a special place. But the truth is, there is no place in America or in the world today that will stay special by accident. And that's because the world is changing faster than ever. And you know, I understand there's a lot of people who don't like change, but the truth is there's really only two kinds of change in the world today. There is planned change and there is unplanned change. I mean, change is coming whether you like it or not, and successful communities are communities that anticipate those changes and they prepare for them and they shape and direct them in a way that they like. Or there's some other communities, the 2/3 of American communities that are losing population, small communities that are losing, that just take whatever comes along. You can grow by choice or you can grow by chance. Abraham Lincoln used to say that the best way to predict the future is to create it yourself. So, you know, it's really up to you to shape the future you want or accept the future that you're given. And so growth and economic development are both about choices. And we have all kinds of choices. So should we put more development in our downtowns or more out on the highway? And by the way, I don't really think that happy face makes that a lot better. You know, should we design for automobiles or should we design for people? Those are choices. You know, growth is also about our children. It's about our grandchildren. It's about the future, and it's about preparing for the future. It's also about balance, harmony. You know, what's the relationship between conservation and economic development, jobs and the environment, downtown and the rest of town, people and the land? But, you know, perhaps most importantly, I think it's about finding win-win solutions to the problems that face us in America today. And I can tell you, I'm one of those people who think we spend way too much time in this country fighting about what we disagree about, and not nearly enough time sitting down community by community to talk about what we do agree about. And I can tell you that when you actually do that, when you have a forum for dialogue about the future of a community, you find there's enormous amounts of agreement about what really matters, what's really important about the future of your community. So people say, what's changing? Well, everything is changing. The economy is changing, demographics, technology, consumer attitudes and market trends, healthcare, energy sources and prices, transportation options. The weather is changing. You know, and communities that actually recognize these things and prepare for them are going to be more successful than those that don't. Let's talk about the economy for a few minutes. So yes, manufacturing is down all over the United States, but business and professional services are up, and education and medicine is up even more. Today, the largest employer in 65 of the 100 biggest cities in the United States is either a university or a hospital. You know, what they call eds and meds. And let's talk about why we're losing jobs. Well, it has a lot less to do with trade than it does with automation. You know, you go to the CVS and we've gotten rid of all the tellers and the cashiers. And this is going on all over the United States. Just give you one example. So New Jersey is the only state that does not allow self-serve gas. They still have gas station attendants. The gas in New Jersey costs on average 2 cents more, but they thought it was worthwhile to still have 20,000 people employed in a job pumping gas. And this is what's been happening. We're losing so many of our jobs to automation while we're not thinking about it, and we're blaming most of the job loss on our trade policies, which that's only part of it. So some of you may have heard of this guy, Richard Florida. He did a book a few years ago called The Creative Class, and he has a new one. It's called The Great Reset. And he says how we live, work, shop, and move around is going to change. And the communities that embrace the future will prosper, and those that do not will decline. Economic development, like growth, is about choices. So should we spend all our time trying to recruit some new industry, or should we figure out ways to grow the industries that we already have? And that's kind of important if you know that we actually have thousands of counties and almost 26,000 municipalities competing for a relative handful of plant factories or distribution centers. We build any more in America every year to do anything. So think about that. So we build like 400 new factories, and we have 26,000 communities competing for those new factories. And so most places are not going to be very successful in that competition. You know, when I was growing up in Alabama, our rural land use plan was let's just widen all the highways. That was our plan. And then we said, well, let's just line the highways with a bunch of junk, and we did that. You know, we thought it was all about cheap land and cheap gas and low-cost labor. But I want to tell you, it's not about low-cost labor, and today it's about highly trained talent. It's not about shotgun recruitment, it's about laser recruitment. It's not about low-cost positioning, it's about high-value positioning. It's not about what you don't have, it's about what you do have. That's what we call asset-based economic development. And I want to tell you that in the world we live in today, quality of life is critically important. And I want to suggest to you that the most important infrastructure investment in Illinois is no longer roads, it is education. Education. You know, and I want to say also that the one big thing in economic development rarely works. So for years in America, we had an arms race to build the biggest convention center. And of course, most cities will never win that arms race. And then it was festival marketplaces, which worked fine in places like Boston and Baltimore. But did you know there were 19 other cities that built festival marketplaces that went bankrupt within 3 years? Like Toledo or Jacksonville or Norfolk, etc. And then it was aquariums. They even in a city like Camden, New Jersey, they said if we could just build an aquarium featuring the fish of New Jersey that we could save Camden, New Jersey. Well, they did build that aquarium. It's a very nice aquarium, but did it save Camden? No, it did not. Because successful economic development is rarely about the one big thing. Much more frequently, it's about lots of smaller things working synergistically together off of a plan that makes sense for you and your community. And by the way, did you know that most new jobs in America are in small businesses, not big businesses? And even in the nation's largest high-tech park, the Research Triangle in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, 71% of all the firms in that 40,000 person employment center work for firms of 50 employees or less, and 42% work for firms of 20 employees or less. But while most new job growth is in small businesses, almost all our big incentives go to big businesses. So I cut this out of an article from the New York Times entitled How to Not Do Economic Development. It was about the state of New Jersey paying the Lockheed Martin Company $107 million, almost $400,000 per employee, to simply move their headquarters from Cherry Hill, New Jersey to Camden, New Jersey. And then, of course, they pay no taxes on the building in Camden for 10 years. And that building is surrounded by a 1,000-car parking lot and a chain-link fence. And it doesn't employ anybody who lives in Camden, New Jersey. So does that make sense? Or does it make more sense to create a great place and have a skilled workforce? You know, when you're spending all your time giving away subsidies to somebody, you just pit one community against another. You move the economic activity around, and you get to this point where when the subsidy runs out, the company moves to get somebody else and give them a better deal somewhere else. But when you're actually investing in your own community, you're creating lasting assets that will pay dividends for a very long period of time. And it also will help existing businesses, the people who already are in your community. Let's talk about demographics. America is getting older, we're getting younger, we're getting more diverse. Somebody is turning 65 every 18 seconds in America. It's going to go on for the next 20 years. You know, and by the way, the fastest growing form of household in America is a single person living alone. Did you know that the vast majority of all American households today do not have school-aged children? People like me, empty nesters, retirees, unrelated singles living together, young professionals, etc. And yet we built housing in America for 30 years like every single family was the Waltons. The mom, the dad, the two kids, and the dog. But as a result, we have an oversupply of large lot single-family housing in almost every major market in the United States and an undersupply of everything else. Small lot housing, cottages, attached housing, in-town housing, you know, apartments, upper story housing in a downtown, et cetera, et cetera. You know, just think about young people and how they're different from their parents. They're getting married later or not at all. They're postponing home ownership. They drive less and they own fewer cars. In 1990, 91% of all 19-year-olds in the United States had a driver's license. Today, 67% of all 19-year-olds have a driver's license. A quarter of all people of driving age don't even know how to drive a car in America today. And we'll talk a little more about what some of the implications of that. And these young people, as I said before, they're clustering in our big cities, but also in certain cool small cities, and we'll talk about what we mean by that. Technology, you know, the death of distance. You can run a business anywhere in the world today. So one of the things we're going to talk about is this idea, if you can't differentiate Bloomington Normal from any other place, you will have no competitive advantage. Let me give you an example. So this is a guy named Foster Freeze. Some of you may have heard of him. He was Rick Santorum's leading campaign contributor in the last presidential go-around before the current one. And then this time he didn't support any of the major candidates. He supported the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee. He runs a mutual fund company called the Brandywine Investment Group, and for about 40 years that company, which was founded by his father, was headquartered in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. That is a busy suburb of Philadelphia. But this is a guy who likes to fly fish. So every summer he'd fly out to Jackson, Wyoming to go fly fishing. And then one day he's stuck in traffic on the Schuylkill Expressway outside of Philadelphia, and all of a sudden a light bulb goes on in his mind and says, hey, you know, I can run a mutual fund company anywhere in the world. So what's he do? He picks up his entire company and he moves it into downtown Jackson, Wyoming. That's the largest private sector employer in Jackson today, 400 financial service employees. You know, and why is he there? Access to outdoor recreation. Who would have thought that that was an economic development driver? But it is. You know, let's talk about consumer attitudes and how they're changing very rapidly. So this is a front page story from USA Today about the fact that the average amount of time that an American consumer has been spending in an enclosed mall has been going down for years. This is why, you know, did you know that we haven't opened a single new mall in the United States since the year 2006? That 20% of all our existing malls have closed, that 30% of the others have been turned inside out, housing put on top of them, et cetera, et cetera. You know, there's an incredible website. You want to see what's going on with malls in America? It's called deadmalls.com. It has an interactive map of the United States. You just go and click on Illinois. You'll get a list of all the dead and dying malls in the state of Illinois. You got one right here in this city. You know, it's because consumer attitudes are changing. The market is changing. We have something called internet shopping now. You know, the whole world is changing. And you know, the one-size-fits-all approach to all of these things just simply doesn't work in a world where we have so many different kinds of people and so many different groups who want so many different things. So I want to leave you with 4 thoughts about what I think are the economic vitals of success in a rapidly changing world. Number 1 is talent. How do we attract and retain smart people? 2 is innovation, the ability to generate new ideas and turn those ideas into commercial realities. That's what the Silicon Valley did. Connectivity, places where people and ideas can easily connect. For example, an incubator or a shared working space or something like that. We'll talk about that a little more. But lastly, I'd like to talk about distinctiveness, place, the unique characteristics that set Bloomington Normal apart from every place else, the things that nobody else has that, you know, they can't duplicate. I want to suggest to you that successful communities are distinctive communities. Some of you have heard this slogan, "Keep Austin Weird." Well, you know, they don't think it's just a funny slogan. They think it's an economic development imperative. What it really means is keep them on the cutting edge, keep them sharp, keep them different, keep them unusual, as opposed to being just the same. You know, in fact, the World Bank has a new publication out, what they call the economics of uniqueness, and they make the same point in a number of ways. They say, sameness is a minus in the world we live in today. It is not a plus. And if you can't differentiate your project or your product or your community from anybody else, you'll just, as I said before, have no competitive advantage. It's interesting, the CEOs for cities basically says, quote, "The unique characteristics of a place may be the only truly defensible source of competitive advantage for cities and towns. Things like historic buildings, things like the Constitution Trail, things like your natural resources, etc." And as Mark Twain used to say, we take stock of a city like we take stock of a man. The clothes or appearance are the externals by which we judge. Let's take a community's front door, its gateway. And just like with meeting a person, a good first impression is important and a bad first impression is hard to change. Do you think you'd rather visit the town of Franklin, Tennessee, or would you rather go to Midfield, Alabama? Which one looks more like a community with a sense of pride and a sense of place? Which one looks more like a community that you would rather spend time or money in? If you don't remember anything else I say this morning, remember this. The image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that every single day in America, people make decisions about where to live, where to invest, where to vacation, where to retire, based on what our communities look like, what they look like. Let's give you a couple of examples. Let's talk about tourism for a second. It's kind of important because it is the biggest industry in the world. It is the first, second, or third largest industry in every American state. So this is the official travel guide for the state of Oregon. Now, if you can read their slogan, it's "Oregon, things look different here." Can you imagine a state travel brochure that said something like, "Illinois, things look the same here"? Well, of course not, because who'd want to come? Tourism is about visiting places that are different, unusual, and unique. The more Bloomington Normal does to enhance its uniqueness, the more people would want to visit. The more you become just like every place else in America, the less reason there is to visit. If every place was just like every place else, there'd be no reason to travel any place. The image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. You know, in the past, it was all about markets. Today, it's all about place. You know, the National Association of Realtors put it this way. They say place is becoming more important than the product. Put another way, perhaps, what's going on outside of a house is more important than what's going on inside of a house. You know, I think Mick Cornett, the mayor of Oklahoma City, summed it up pretty well. He said, economic development is really the result of creating places that people want to be. And if you travel around a region and look at where people are hanging out, those are the kind of places that people want to be. So you should be creating more of those kind of places. So I want to say there's a few dimensions of this that you might want to think about. One, of course, is anchor institutions, places like Heartland Community College or Illinois State University. And anchors are proven economic engines in some communities and not so much in other communities, because it depends on whether or not they engage with your community. The two biggest recipients of federal research dollars in the United States are Stanford University and Johns Hopkins University. Johns Hopkins thought all their research was for internal consumption. They didn't pay any attention to the city of Baltimore. And Baltimore, despite the fact this is the largest employer in Maryland, is still a struggling city. Now they finally are investing literally billions around their neighborhood and around their hospital because they couldn't get people to come to work there in a crime-infested, rundown neighborhood. On the other hand, Stanford created one of the greatest job creators in the world's history, called the Silicon Valley. They figured out how to commercialize the research coming out of the university. We need to figure out how to create these partnerships between universities and cities. We also need healthy downtowns. Why? Because if you don't have a healthy downtown, you simply don't have a healthy town. The downtown is the heart and soul of any community. It'll be the first thing a person looks at when they're thinking about making a relocation or moving to your community. Even if they're not going to live or work in the downtown, they'll look at the downtown. It is the icon. It is the thing that they will use to judge how well a community is doing. And I can tell you, we've learned in America that it is very hard to be a suburb of nothing. So, the apple rots from the inside out. So investing in downtown really is about investing in the entire town. And, notice this headline from a business economic development magazine. This is basically a magazine for, business park developers. When site searching the South, make sure you inspect the community's downtown first. It matters to everyone, as I said, even if you're not going to be putting your building in the downtown. But I want to tell you that the world is moving back downtown. And Cushman Wakefield has a new study out showing the names of 500 major American companies that have relocated in the last 5 years from suburban office park locations back into downtowns. Places like Motorola and McDonald's and Marriott and General Electric and Amazon. I could show you, go on. And they say, well, why are they moving? Well, first and foremost, to attract and retain talented workers. But think about this. So this is the new world headquarters for Amazon right in downtown. And it used to be when they were out in the suburbs, there was only one way to get to Amazon. It was called drive your car. Now, of course, the employees, they can drive there if they want to, but they could also take a train there. They could take a bus there. They could take a boat there. They can ride a skateboard there. They can walk there. And at the end of the day, they're right in the middle of all the action, which is where a lot of these young people want to be. And it's not restricted to big cities. This is a small city in the state of Maryland, Frederick, Maryland. This is where my daughter lives now. And all those buildings in the early 1990s were vacant. All those buildings, nothing was going on. But they decided to make an investment in themselves. They had a big flood along something called Carroll Creek, and the mayor decided that he wanted to create a small-town version of the San Antonio Riverwalk that was also combined as a flood project. People thought he was crazy. Well, that $11 million public investment led to $400 million in private investment. Today, this small city has 5,000 downtown residents. The whole population of the whole city is only 30,000, but 5,000 people living in their downtown. 800 retailers and restaurants. 25 small high-tech companies all moved back into a downtown because it's a great place to be. And it's one of those places where people and ideas can indeed easily mix. Let's talk about historic buildings and places. Some of you probably have looked around this town and realized you got some pretty nice historic buildings here. Why are historic buildings important? Well, I think first and foremost because these are the places that physically connect us to the past. They tell us who we are and where we came from. It seems to me that a city without a past is like a man without a memory. So think about, some of you probably read some of Thomas Wolfe's novels. He's the guy that wrote Look Homeward, Angel. He penned the immortal line, "You can't go home again." Well, sadly, Tom Wolfe, he can't go home again, at least to his original house, because here it is. It's in this parking lot in Asheville, North Carolina. It's interesting. Daniel Webster once wrote, he said, quote, "The man who feels no sentiment or veneration for the memory of his forefathers is himself unworthy of kindred regard and remembrance." At its essence, saving the historic buildings of any community is about saving the heart and the soul of a community. But it's also incredibly important to your economic well-being as well. So I chair the National Main Street Center Board. Their headquarters is in Chicago. I'll be meeting with them this afternoon. And pound for pound, dollar for dollar, this is one of the most effective pieces of economic development we've ever done in America. It doesn't require those $100 million subsidies. This is people working together to make a community better. And let me just give you one small example. So this used to be the fire station in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And, became obsolete as a fire station. The guy turned it into a pizza parlor. But like a lot of towns, this was a town going downhill until they brought in Main Street and they started working with the owners of downtown buildings to restore their facades. Did a beautiful job. Tells the story of the history of the building. But guess what else happened? Sales of pizza almost doubled. And it sustained that over a multi-year period. Let's show you a couple of nationally famous examples. So this, of course, is the French Quarter in New Orleans, and I was part of the redevelopment team brought down by the state of Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. And they said, we want not just a physical redevelopment plan, we want an economic redevelopment plan. So all of the consultants or whatever, we all said, well, what's your biggest industry? Is it the oil industry, the sugar industry, the chemical industry, the seafood industry? No. The biggest industry in the entire state of Louisiana is the tourism industry, number one. And what is the engine of that industry? There it is. It's called the French Quarter. But did you know that for about 40 years, the Louisiana Department of Transportation wanted to put a freeway through the middle of the French Quarter? That is more important, ladies and gentlemen, and more valuable than any plant, factory, or distribution center in the entire state of Louisiana. But people didn't really think about it like that. Let's go over to San Antonio, Texas, and visit the San Antonio Riverwalk. That's the basis of that city's multi-billion-dollar a year annual tourism industry. It's the most visited place in all of Texas. But most people don't know that at one point in the past, the city thought so little of that small river, they actually wanted to put it underground into a culvert. Today, it's the most visited place in all of Texas. Let's go out to Washington State and go to the Pike Place Farmers Market. That's the number one destination in the state of Washington. It gets about 8 million visitors a year. But once again, there were some people who wanted to tear it down. They were on the city council. They said, well, we got to tear it down. Why? Well, we need more downtown parking. Like parking for what? You can have all the parking in the world. If there's nothing to do, who's going to care if they go there or not? Now they love and revere this place and recognize it for the economic engine that it is. What's the number one destination in Florida? It's Disney World. What's number two? You're looking at it. It's called the Art Deco Historic District in South Miami Beach, the largest collection of Art Deco buildings in the world. They were all going to be torn down. People were saying, oh, we got to have more high-rise condos in South Florida. And you guys been to South Florida recently? You think they have a lack of high-rise condos down there? But literally, people come from all over the world to visit this place. Or how about the Camden Yards Baseball Stadium in Baltimore, probably the most influential sports stadium ever built on this continent. Not just because it was a new stadium, but because it was the first of the so-called retro stadiums. It did the best job of integrating new construction with the historic buildings and neighborhoods that surrounded that site. You notice that actually the field is 16 feet below the street level? And you know why they did that? Because they didn't want the stadium to tower over the row houses that surround the stadium. They wanted to be a good neighbor. Well, there's a concept, having new fit in with old, being a good neighbor. You know, Arthur Fromer kind of sums it up pretty well. He says, among cities and towns with no particular recreational appeal, those that preserve their past continue to enjoy tourism. Those that haven't receive almost no tourists at all. Tourists simply won't go to a city or town that has lost its soul. But, I want to suggest that preservation goes well beyond tourism. So we do a report every year at ULI called Emerging Trends in Real Estate. We look at what's going on in the real estate world. And last year, what our research found was that restored industrial buildings like old mills are now commanding higher rents than new Class A office space. You say, well, how's that possible? I'll tell you why. Because all creative class employers like to be in buildings with character. And they also like these buildings because they have large floor plates and they can move things around a lot, and they want flexibility in the workplace today. And let me give you another example. So the hotel industry has found that young people in particular think that in lodging facilities, authenticity and interesting are more important than predictable and comfortable. And so we are finally starting to restore historic buildings for hotels all over America, and we're putting them back in our downtowns. And in fact, downtown hotels have been a key to community revitalization in one community after another. You know, basically, I want to tell you something. So many small cities, you can't stay in the downtown. You have to stay out on the highway. And you can't walk from that hotel to anything else. So when you actually, you know, people are putting new hotels in old YMCAs, and old office buildings, and old factory buildings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk about parks and green space. You know, we have a concept we call park-centric development. Where's the most valuable land in all of New York State? Well, there it is. It's the land next to Central Park. But parks create value and vitality. I mean, just go up the road to check out the Millennium Park. Yeah, it cost a lot of money, but it's created billions of dollars in new real estate value. Billions of dollars. There's 3,000 units of new housing next to Millennium Park. It's the #1 tourist attraction in the city of Chicago. But you know, small cities can do the same exact thing at different scales. This is a small town in southwest Texas, Sulphur Springs. And you know, they was a nice courthouse square, and they'd have a nice 4th of July celebration, but the other 364 days a year, nothing was going on there until they did this. Now they have 300 events a year. Now they have people coming downtown every day. And that has helped bring the businesses on the courthouse square back to life. Or how about Rapid City, which replaced a parking lot with a park, gave the downtown a heart and soul, and brought young people back into downtown. Arts and culture, you can use arts to tell the story of your community. Everybody's got some important person, or if it's not an important person, an ordinary person, or maybe it's the story. This is the Chisholm Trail mural in Fort Worth, which tells the story about the cattle drives played in the founding of Fort Worth. Or how about this one? This is the big postcard in Orlando. You know those old postcards? Tells you a little story about the history of the community. I'll just say a couple words about retail and how the world is changing in the commercial and retail world. So, you know, I want to suggest to you that the kind of retail you are building on the veteran parkways of this city is retail for the last century. And I want to suggest to you that the future belongs to downtowns and main streets and mixed-use development and town center development. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is because we're completely overbuilt out there. And in fact, we got over 1 billion square feet of empty retail space around the United States now, most of it out on the highway, most in empty big box stores. And you know, we sort of just went on this craze of building stores before the recession. And part of the problem is we were building retail space 5 times faster than retail sales here in this country. So somebody'd open up a new strip mall and it would cannibalize the one down the road. And you'd open up this big box and it would shut down the other big box. And you know, now because of the internet, things are changing. And so I mentioned malls. Let me just show you how the world has changed. So this used to be, this is the county seat of the county I live in Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland. And in 1970, in their infinite wisdom, they decided it was a great idea to tear down the entire downtown and to replace it with this lovely mall you see here called the Rockville Mall. But guess what? Now they've torn the mall down, put the downtown back. It's kind of a metaphor for America, and it's going on all over the United States. In many ways, this is the new promised land. You know, you got these, underperforming empty parking lots all over the place, and this is a redevelopment opportunity. And it's a redevelopment opportunity because you already got the infrastructure there. It's a well-drained site. It was interesting, we were in downtown Normal having dinner last night and just looking at all the empty surface parking lots. Well, I'm going to tell you something. In the future, when we have autonomous vehicles, and by the way, car share is growing 32% a year in the United States. Car share growing 32% a year. We're going to need less parking than we have now. And all the architects are saying we need to design parking garages that can be converted to something else later on. So here's where we're going. So here's your single-use auto-oriented Best Buy. Well, here's another Best Buy, okay? With people actually sleeping upstairs and shopping downstairs. And I know that's not for everybody, but it might be for some of that 75% of American households without school-aged children. And some people say, well, we couldn't do it in a small city. Well, here's a new Dairy Queen in the small town of Herndon, Virginia, with a dentist office upstairs. How appropriate. You know, and let's talk about grocery stores. You know, when I first moved to D.C. many years ago to law school, we didn't have any grocery stores in the city except 2 Safeways. We called one the Soviet Safeway because they didn't have any food and you had to wait in line for what little there was. Because all the grocery stores were out of town somewhere. Well, let me show you some of our new grocery stores. This is what the future of grocery stores looks like. You know, mixed-use buildings, a Safeway with offices above, or a Publix in a restored historic building, or a Target in a multi-story building, or stores in underserved neighborhoods. You know, a Giant in a restored market building, a Kroger in a mixed-use building, a Whole Foods in a small format store, a Safeway with the parking on the roof. Here's the old Walmart, okay, but let me show you the new Walmart. Here it is. This is our first Walmart. It's in a 5-story building, has 200 apartments on top of the Walmart. There's a swimming pool on the roof. There are actually real windows in that Walmart that let in real sunlight onto the floor of that building. You say, where's the parking? The parking is under the building. And you don't need as much parking in a city anyway, because by the way, did you know how often a young millennial male goes to the grocery store? 4 times a week. 4 times a week. I can't see that back there, whatever that says. Let me just show you a few others real quickly. This is our second Walmart in D.C., but this is going on everywhere. There's a Target in Minneapolis, a Target in Chicago, a Target in Portland. By the way, Target's buying up all the historic department stores like the Carson Prairie Scott building in Chicago and restoring them. You know, and what's a big box store anyway? It's what we used to call a department store. And, you know, even a Home Depot. You know, somebody said to me, how do you get the lumber home? And the answer is they deliver. Well, there's a concept. But let me show you what's going on even in the icon of American suburbia, Bentonville, Arkansas. They are now investing hundreds of millions of dollars to turn Bentonville into a walkable mixed-use place because they couldn't get employees to move there from other parts of the country to work at the Walmart World Headquarters. So they are investing in downtown Walmarts, in multi-story buildings on the main square of the town. You know, walkable places create real estate value. Just one final story. So when we were down, we did a tour of Bentonville and Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I'm driving down the interstate highway, and I saw this Waffle House on at the interstate exit. And you know, I didn't really, you don't really pay attention to a Waffle House unless you're like dying for a waffle. And so I got into downtown Fayetteville, and there's another Waffle House. It's in a brand new building, and there's 3 floors of housing on top of that Waffle House. And I said, well, that's interesting. I'd never seen a mixed-use Waffle House before. So I find the city hall in Fayetteville, and I go over to there, and I track down the city planner. I say, can you tell me anything about that Waffle House? And they say, sure, we've already done a study about that Waffle House. And it turns out the downtown Waffle House is making 20% more than the Waffle House out on the highway. But more importantly, it's producing more taxes per acre, more jobs per acre. There are 32 people live upstairs, so it has more residents per acre. Nobody lives above the Waffle House out on the highway. And by the way, if you're eating a lot of waffles, you might want to take a walk after you've eaten the waffles. So it's actually good for health as well. This is why the future belongs to Main Street and mixed-use development, because it is outperforming single-use drive-only development everywhere in America. And by the way, the downtowns of the world have something we call the place-making dividend. It means people stay longer, come back more often, and spend more money in places that attract their affection. How many people here in Illinois do you think really feel affectionate about the strip malls? Oh, let's go to the strip mall to hang out. People will go to an environment like that to hang out, and they will come back more often, and they will spend more money. So I want to end by just saying this. So I've been in this business for a very long time, and I've come to some conclusions about why some communities succeed and others fail. First and foremost, successful communities always have a vision for the future. Some might call that a plan for the future. And I can tell you, growing up in Alabama, I run into people from time to time say, I'm against planning. And I always say to them, well, then you tell me the name of any successful organization, institution, corporation, or community that doesn't plan for the future. Failing to plan simply means planning to fail. As the book of Proverbs says, without vision, the people will perish. And those successful visions always begin by inventorying your assets. And successful communities build all their plans, whether it's an economic development plan, a land use plan, a tourism plan, whatever, around the enhancement of your existing assets. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulation. I didn't say I'm against regulation. It prevents bad things from happening, sets a minimum standard of conduct, but you need to use carrots, not just sticks. Successful communities pick and choose among development proposals. All development is not created equal. You know what the biggest impediment to better development in many small cities in America is? It's a fear of saying no to anything. Well, if you're afraid to say no to anything, you will get the worst of everything. Communities that set low standards or no standards will simply compete to the bottom. Communities that set high standards compete to the top because they know if you say no to bad development, you will always get better development in its place. Successful communities cooperate with their neighbors for mutual benefit. Successful communities consider what they look like. Successful communities have, strong leaders and committed citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand that no is a powerful word in America, but I want to tell you a more powerful word, yes. Yes, we can make this community a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. A pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity, but an optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. You can grow without destroying the things that people love. Thank you so much for having me here today.